11 o'clock. We are here for a special township zoning amendment procedure meeting. Our zoning department has gone through some changes, and at this point now, after the township trustees must set a public hearing date, no more than 30 days from the date of the receipt of the zoning commission's recommendation on the amendment, which we now have and why we're having a meeting today. And I believe that I need to start this meeting by reading the letter from the Geauga County Planning Commission, and then after I read this letter, we'll go into these amendment changes and discuss them. So this is to our zoning secretary, Sarah Yeoman, and it's proposed zoning amendment number ZC2023-01, and it says, please be advised that the Geauga County Planning Commission at its meeting held on March 14th, 2023, voted to recommend approval with modifications of the proposed Auburn Township zoning amendment ZC 2023-01 as initiated by the Zoning Commission on February 23 of 2023 as follows. Number 1, Article 2, Recreation Facilities. Recommended removing proposed language prohibiting outdoor shooting ranges. Number 2, Article 5, Section 5.02, recommended removing the proposed language as a 10-foot maximum setback for menu ordering systems is too restrictive and the township should consider alternatives. Number 3, Article 6, Section 6.01, recommended removing the proposed language requiring a new legal description or plat. And number 4, Article 6, Section 6.05, recommended 40 days instead of 60 days for our recommended zoning. Okay, pursuant to RC 519.12, the Planning Commission's recommendation must be considered by the Zoning Commission at its public hearing regarding the proposed amendment. Subsequent to the hearing, the recommendation is to be forwarded to the Board of Township Trustees. If the subject amendment is adopted by the Board of Trustees, a copy thereof must be provided to this office within 5 days after its effective date. If you have any questions, please contact the Planning Commission. Sincerely, Linda Crombie, Planning Director, Geauga County Planning Commission. And with that, I will open up discussion. If someone from the zoning board wants to go over anything first before we discuss any of this, and we'll take comments from our zoning inspector and from anyone here present. Any comments or?
I would recommend I was talking to Jane, and I believe that recommendations 1 through 3 were not incorporated.
Correct.
And then, but Article the 4th was. So you may want to go over why those recommendations were not
We don't let Scott
utilized.
speak because he was at the last meeting.
So we greatly appreciate the input coming from the Planning Commission, and we spend a lot of time looking at and considering their suggestions. We don't always adopt all those suggestions. We spend a lot of time looking and considering this ourselves. One of the things that we've tried to do is clean up language so that when we're talking about the same thing in different chapters, it says the same thing. We have Mr. Diedrich available, so we've talked language, we've talked what other communities are doing, whether we're being excessive or all those types of issues. So we take all this very seriously, and we really appreciate the input from Mrs. Crombie, or Ms. Crombie. And I'll go through these 1 through 4. Article 2, we don't prohibit outdoor shooting ranges. We're prohibiting outdoor shooting ranges in a commercial recreational facility. If it's a law enforcement facility, then they're allowed to have an outdoor shooting range. But this was viewed because the area backs up against residential more from the standpoint of noise and how it impacts the neighbors. We believe that a shooting range is gonna exceed our noise ordinance. And so, because it was limited just to commercial facilities outdoor, we decided to leave that language in there. So that's Article 2, item number 1. The maximum setback, now I reviewed this, but I wasn't there for the discussion on Article 5. Ted, do you recall?
I don't know that I was there either, to be honest with you.
I was there.
Okay, what did?
Go ahead,
was it?
Dave.
In regards to the 10 feet, I think the zoning commission was reluctant to modify it because they thought that it correlated with the 10-foot width of the drive-up. So they elected to leave it as is.
Okay, makes sense.
That's correct. When we talked about it, that's what they had said, but neither of us were at that meeting. Item number 3, we haven't required a new legal description or a plat. We've given the zoning inspector the ability, the word we used is may, in the event that it's unclear as to, and we're concerned about the quality of the site plan, so that the zoning inspector can adequately and accurately determine whether, in fact, if they tell us 13 feet, it's 13 feet or more. So it just was to give Mr. Kitco the tool when he needed it to require a professionally done plat.
Well, that makes sense, because Frank can't do his job unless he has that.
Well,
Right.
you know what, when I was on the BZA, I sat through an emergency BZA meeting that we had because this lady was selling her house and it was caught by the title agency in a survey that she had encroached on the setback. And this was kind of tricky because it was on a cul-de-sac, so it's difficult to place those to begin with. But they found that and they were querying the deal until she got a variance or somehow it was addressed. So we gave her that variance, but that's one of the reasons and that we adopted that language.
I was in the BZA for 10 years, and that actually
If
came
I
up
can
quite a
comment,
bit.
that by doing this, this gives me the authority to make, in situations where it's questionable, now gives me the authority to say, I have to have this, or I won't issue the permit. Whereas before, if they wanted to fight me, but in certain situations, I can say, look, I need a current legal description of this lot done by a professional survey and stamped. And so this gives me, as a zoning inspector, more authority in situations. They don't always have to, but if it's a questionable situation, or especially in a neighborhood where there may be a disputed property line, and there are some of those in this township as well, probably well know by now, but anyway, this gives me the authority to say you must do this, or you can't build your building or structure, so.
Well, that's
Just
it. A lot of the homeowners are gonna find that, inconvenient, they're gonna argue with you.
Right,
Trust me, like I said, my years in zoning, it's gonna save them a lot in the long run.
yes.
So wait till you build the house and then find out a corner of it is sitting over. And unfortunately, we haven't made too many people move their houses because we just thought that would be mean.
Right.
But,
But that's been
so,
done before.
yeah, you're
Yes,
not giving a
yes.
variance basically
Swimming
just
pool,
because somebody did something dumb and you have to
pool.
protect them, so. So this is helping people protect themselves, so that makes sense also.
Just to piggyback real quick, we thought that Mr. Kitco already had that, it was implied, but we wanted to clarify so that if there was any discussion about it, it was right there in black and white, so.
Okay, makes sense.
So Frank, you're in agreement with everything our zoning board's done with these articles?
Yes. You know, there's a couple more that are not even addressed, that are highlighted here that, you know, some changes and that you can go over if you have any questions on those, you know. But those were the four that dealt with the recommendations of the planning commission. I agree with the 40 days. It gives our Board of Appeals secretary, which happens to be Jane at the moment, but it gives that person more time to get, and we could have gone 90 days. Kristen Ryan says you can go 90, 60, whatever, and they, you know, we did pick 30 or 60, and then the planning commission recommended 40. So that way, and that, well, I'm okay with that, and Jane's okay with that too. But if we stayed at the 30, sometimes the meetings overlap, and the Board of Appeals situation, there's a legal ad that must be submitted, there's all kinds of things that have to be done to make things, and sometimes getting the minutes, and getting everything approved, sometimes it requires more than one meeting, and so.
The additional time gives you to be able to
Right.
do
This gives
the
her
second
more
meeting without
time,
having to-
gives the secretary more time to get that done, and then less likely that you're gonna have extra meetings just to approve minutes or something like that. I think there's like 3 or 4 times it's happened in the past, in the last 2 years, where we've had to have she's had to have extra meetings because to approve the minutes and everything to get within the time frame of 30 days, that's all. You know, so 40, so I'm okay, both Jane and I are okay with that, I have no problem with that.
Well, if every month half 28 days, we wouldn't have had to change the language.
Right.
And we don't want to make it burdensome on the people that were going through the process either, so we don't want to stretch it out, but we don't want to have that extra meeting for no other reason than to approve minutes.
Right.
Just didn't seem to be a wise course to continue.
Dave, do you have any other comments on it, or?
No, I think that's fine. It does kind of boil down to a logistical thing. And 40 days, I think, was quite workable.
Well, I've had the opportunity to go through all these and read the things that are just highlighted through all this. I don't see a problem with it, so I'll entertain a motion to accept ZC 2023.
Well, we have to close the public hearing
Close the public hearing and
and
then
then
vote
do the approval at a meeting.
and our regular.
And what I was gonna recommend, I agree, I have no problems with this.
Right.
But what I would like to is give PJ an opportunity to voice in. So I wouldn't see any problem with holding this off till next meeting. It'll fall within the time frame. It's not gonna hold anything up. And just give PJ the opportunity to, if he has any comments on it.
Is that all right with your board?
But I do have one question as I was going through this. It kind of jumped out at me, and it's not super important, but, okay, it's 905-3. It says no sexually oriented businesses may be established on any lot which has frontage, borders on, or touches US Route 422, Washington Street, or State Route 44. Okay? Now, if you go to 9051, it says, or 9052, sexually oriented businesses may only be located in those areas that are zoned as I-1. Well, if you look at the location of I-1, it's pretty far from 44 Washington Street and 422. But if you don't want to change that, I thought of a justification for it. Should we ever do an expansion of I-1 in those other areas, then that would make sense for the future to.
Well, yeah, that's why remember when that was originally written,
Yes.
there was no, Washington Street, 422 were considered the same. Well, they're not anymore, so to clarify that.
Washington was 422, and then
Right.
that was alternate
Now-
422, and then they met up at, yeah.
Right, so now, just to make sure that if that district were to extend the I district were to extend south to East Washington, there could not be a sexually oriented business on that corner by doing this, that's all.
Okay,
That was the justification, Mike, you hit it right on the head.
okay, that was all I had.
Okay.
All right, so Gene, I will take that as your, is it a motion to adjourn the public hearing?
I'll ask if there's any other comments, anything before we close this meeting?
But yes, that's fine if you'd like to wait to the, no problem.
Okay. The motion to close this
Okay.
meeting?
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second? Yes.
Right. Yes.
Okay, we have
Okay.
a little less than 15 minutes and we'll begin our regular second meeting in April meeting.